Hey guys, today I'll show you exactly how I match an entire scene in DaVinci Resolve so you're ready to grade and create a look. We'll go from this to this. I'm Felipe Guerra, professional colorist. I've spent 10 years grading commercials, films, and music videos. First of all, these are the project settings that I'm using. The normal DaVinci YRGB color science, the timeline is in DaVinci Wide Gamut, and my output is Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. The only thing that I'm applying in this timeline is my transformation from Arri Wide Gamut to DaVinci Wide Gamut, and then in my post clip I'm transforming from DaVinci Wide Gamut back to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. This node tree might be intimidating at first, but I did a whole video explaining how it works and what's the thought process behind it. Right now, there is nothing happening here, but everything is built in case I need it. I'm working in groups, so we have a pre-clip, clip level, and post-clip. Also, we have timeline. My CST is happening pre-clip and post-clip. Okay, so first of all, to start grading, we need to balance every shot. Before applying any look, we want everything to look consistent and uniform. That is why we work in groups. So once we have everything balanced, we can apply a global look that will affect everything, and that is how we create our look. That way, we don't have to recreate the look for each shot. We just build one look for the complete commercial or scene or whatever. In this case, this is an old commercial that I did, and it's not a full commercial, but it's enough shots to show you how it's done. So first of all, we need to select a hero shot, the one that we want to recreate all across the film. So let's say this is the shot that we like, and this is the one that we want to make our whole movie gravitate towards to. To balance and correct, I'm only going to use my primary color wheels, nothing else. I'll show you the first one with my mouse, and then I'll do it with my panel to make it quicker. But I'm only going to use these ones. In case I need to do an extreme exposure adjustment or a global exposure adjustment, I'm going to do it with my HDR wheels and the global exposure. Just like that. Everything else will be done with the lift, gamma, and gain. So let's begin. Let's say we like this shot. Let's refine the contrast a bit. Okay, and now we want everything to match this exposure. So we can grab a still and we can come to the next shot and we can come to the gallery, select that still and play it. Now you can start balancing with your lift, gamma, and gain to try to match the exposure. In this case, this is not that helpful since we're not seeing the whole of the image. So what we can do is we can come into our sizing tab and select this last tab, which is reference sizing. And now if we adjust anything, it will only adjust the still. So now we can move it, zoom it out or whatever, and make it smaller. Now it'll be easier to work. Let's turn it off And one trick we can do is we can come to timeline and let's turn off the saturation for a while so we can see the exposure better. You also gotta keep in mind that color does play a part in contrast, so this will be a primary balance to get us in the ballpark. It will not be our final adjustment, but it's a great way to start and not get focused on the color or the temperature or whatever, and just start balancing contrast. So let's do that. Let's go back here and take another still, and now we can play it back, boom, and go to the other shots. So play through the shot, and now let's start balancing our contrast. Something like that. Very subtle. I'm moving fast with my panel, but you can see everything that I'm doing over here in the primaries. I'm just adjusting gamma, lift, or gain, nothing else. You can watch your scopes to try and see what the darkest part of the image is and the brightest. Skin tones and everything in the mid-range is obviously living here, but what you want to try to match is where the overall exposure of the image is. Let's say the bulk of this graph, if it's living here, the image is hotter or way more exposed than your reference. Same thing if everything is happening down here. That would mean that everything is underexposed against the reference. And your contrast would be the difference between this point and that point. So, something like that. You can see that this image is extremely hot. Of course, you need to rely on your scopes, but I'm also heavily relying on my eyes, as with time, you kind of learn what is needed. And now, let's add the saturation back and let's play it so we can see what's going on. So that already feels much better. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's way more consistent than before. And now we can get into our temperature, tint, and hues. So we need to match everything in temperature and tint. You gotta remember also that balancing doesn't mean that everything needs to match exactly the same. You need to make it match to a point that is consistent, and while you're viewing the film, nothing feels off. There's different times of the day, different locations, different feelings. So, for example, if I try to balance this to that, I would be doing a disservice to the story or the feeling of the commercial. So if something was filmed with an intent, you don't want to take that out. Even before balancing, you always need to talk to your director or your DOP so they can guide you through the film and tell you what the purpose of the story is, what the purpose of each scene is. So again, with this part of the image, if I try to balance this to that, it's not going to work. It's a different feeling, It's a different part of the story, and it's literally a different part of the day as well. So with that in mind, we can proceed. To balance temperature and tint, we can use our parade, but maybe it's easier for us to use the vector scope, which indicates what are the dominant colors. The center would be white, and here you can see that this is yellow, this is red, this is magenta, blue, cyan, and green. Without looking at the scopes, I can see that the scene is a bit magenta, and this next one, it's a bit more warm, green, yellow. How can we match it? We can use our temperature or tint, or we can use our offset. So let's remove some magenta from this one. Let's add some warmness back. And that is already feeling much better. It's not perfect, but it's feeling better. Now we can play it back. And we can always adjust again the exposure if we see that something is off. This one again is feeling a bit too magenta. And a bit warm. Another tool that you can use is the multi-view. In this case, you can select the current group and it will show you all of the shots that are in the group, which in this case is a bit too much. You can use the neighbor clips, so we can see one shot before. In this case, I want to be more precise and select the clips that I want to see together. So I'm going to click on those with my command activated, or Control on Windows, and we can see all of the shots together. And we can clearly see that it's not perfectly balanced. So we need to go back and adjust. You can clearly see the differences in the shirt. This one is way colder and less magenta. All of this feel a bit better, but it's not perfect again. And this one is never gonna match exactly. It's lit in a very different way. So the camera settings are also different. And the lighting is never gonna match. So we gotta do our best to make it feel consistent. It doesn't need to be exact, it just needs to be consistent when we're watching the film. So let's go back to that. Now the contrast is feeling a bit too much in this one. And you always need to go back and adjust everything a couple of times until it feels good. I wanted to show you with a lot of clips so you understand how the actual process is. If I show you only 3 clips, it's going to be a very short video, and I'm not going to follow the proper workflow since it's going to be way easier than if I adjust a whole commercial. And that's why it takes time, because you do multiple passes. You go through it one time and it feels good, and then you check it again and it doesn't feel that great. So we just keep adjusting until it feels good. And remember, all of this is even before getting to the creative part, which is building a look. Here I removed some saturation from the image. Now remember, as I said, this doesn't need to match exactly. We just need the contrast to be consistent. Again, just consistent contrast across the shots. And we can even push a bit of creative look here, adding temp and tint. Same thing here. And same thing here. So let's take a look again. Well, it feels way better than the beginning. Still not perfect, but we're getting there. And your main goal should be balancing towards the skin tones. So the skin feels natural, it doesn't feel crushed, or it doesn't feel heavily tinted. That's our main goal. Second, we need to create the overall atmosphere, because if I don't, and for example, I start balancing because I feel like the overall look is better that way, and I'm gonna balance the skin afterwards, I'm always gonna be fighting against that. And what I wanna do while balancing, it's the exact opposite. I need to build a clean foundation for when I build my look, I won't be fighting against my initial balance. Again, we can do a final pass. Then we need to check saturation. Overall, I feel like it's looking good. Remove some saturation from some shots. And then, now that we have this foundation, all that we did here is global in the sense that it's not global that it's affecting every shot, but it's global in the sense that I'm not adjusting a specific part of the image, I'm adjusting the whole of the image. So my exposure affects all of the image, my temperature affects all of the image. The second step of balancing shots after you did the initial balance is to check every shot and see that, okay, maybe these magenta flowers here are feeling a bit hotter than the ones here. And maybe the sky is different here than here and here. So what we need to do is try to make everything consistent. The sky should feel more or less the same in all of the shots. Again, it's never going to be perfect. We're in an open space. The camera is pointing in every direction and it's a different time of the day. So it's not going to match exactly, but we should be in the ballpark every time. Then we can start being more granular. You can still do this with the curves and come here to hue versus hue to change the hue of that color. Or the same thing with hue versus saturation. We select that hue and we change the saturation of that hue. We can make that selection broader. And now we lower the saturation a bit. Okay, so I can show you a couple of tricks. I got a note here that says compress. Let's create a couple more parallel nodes. And what I mean by compress is that we can, for example, select this magenta color with the qualifier and try to only select that. We can soften the noise, clean the white, black, and make the selection as soft as possible. And now we can check that that selection is being applied by group level to all of the clips. And what I'm trying to do is I'm going to select the one that I like and use my color compressor here and select the target color again. And now I can compress the hue and saturation, and it's going to do that for the whole of the group. So you need to be subtle with these effects, and that is affecting all of those colors and trying to compress it to that target color. You see, it's very subtle, the original color, the original magenta color, and trying to bring it back to here. Of course, on a real project, we need to be very thorough, and maybe I would select that magenta color specifically in each shot and try to take it towards where I like it or where it's needed, and then, only then, do that global compression. The same thing, the skin. I can select the skin tones and again clean the selection. And it's not going to be only the skin tones that are selected, because there's a lot of hues that are similar to that. But, oh, I did this clip level. We just need the skin tones. And now, if we desaturate that, for example, it's going to desaturate the skin on every shot. If I add some temperature, it's going to add temperature to every shot as well. So we can take the skin tone to anything that we like. We can remove detail from it, add some detail. Maybe we just want it with a bit more temperature and a bit less saturation. And then we can also compress the hue. So let's say we like that skin tone. If I compress the hue, it's going to take all of my selection, including the lips. So you got to be careful with it. But we can compress the skin tones. And we make all of the skin tones feel a bit more similar. Now that we did our primary balancing across all of the shots, we can start adding our look, which I built using my own plugin, Engine Pro, Color Sculpt, Film Sharpness, Lens Pro, and Film Grain, which we'll cover on a future video. But now we can see that if we apply this look to the whole project, it fits way better. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.